Mama. Welcome to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Michelle Gibbs, and this podcast exists to help scholarly mamas like you to achieve your life and academic goals without sacrificing what matters most. Here, we're changing the overwhelm, juggle, struggle narrative around what it means to be a mama on an academic journey to one of empowerment, fulfillment, and purposeful success. So how do we successfully navigate these journeys? Well, first, we need the space to embrace this unique blend. Let's begin by saying yes to creating a life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside, because that's when we truly become purposefully whole. So get ready for the most non-traditional, unconventional, and revolutionary approach to PhD motherhood, because one thing I have learned over my many years of experience on this journey is that if you want something different, you have to do something different. But you must be brave enough to think differently first. So, Mama, are you in? Fabulous! Let's begin. These are our journeys of becoming. We've all been told a story. Hustle hard, sacrifice everything, make it your life, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get to enjoy life one day. Hustle culture says, grind now, live later. I say, live well while in pursuit. Because I don't buy the whole hustle culture. I don't. And so today I want to share and discuss whether success requires an unhealthy obsession. And I'll talk about why I've used the words unhealthy obsession, words that I came across recently in a video that popped up on my feed. So today we're going to be throwing out this old rule book of hustle culture and rewriting what it means to actually achieve success. What does it mean to actually finish your PhD or achieve some goal that you're working towards well, without losing your mind, your soul, without selling your soul in the process. And this is what I want to get into today. Okay, so where does this idea of unhealthy obsession actually come from? For some reason, I was on YouTube and this video popped up for me, and maybe because I know he talks a lot about productivity and things, but I'm sure you've come across videos on YouTube from Ali Abdal, and he normally shares really lovely videos, really good recommendations of books and things. And he was an NHS doctor who then became an entrepreneur and went that route instead, which is totally fine. Everybody's entitled to create the life that they want for themselves. But he shared this video talking about how to get rich. And for some reason, that felt, like when you see a title of a video and you think, what? Like, that seems like clickbait. This seems like a really strange title, but still very captivating. And I decided to watch this video, not because I am, spending my time thinking about this, but I just was curious as to what this video could have been about. And in this video, he talks about how it requires an unhealthy obsession with getting rich, talks about the top 1% and how, those are the people who he now spends a lot of time around, being the wealthy person that he has become. And what he's observed in those people is that they've all had this unhealthy obsession with getting rich. For those of them who had families and hobbies and other things, they've kind of sacrificed all of that and really kind of zoom in, laser focus on becoming rich. And then, they look back and think, oh my goodness, my child's grown up and I haven't been there. I don't even know who they are and all of that. Or they've grinded in the hustle culture, achieve that goal, and then they're able to reflect and, see things differently, find hobbies, live life, enjoy life, focus on the things that really matter. And so I wanted to talk about this because, like I said, he's a former doctor who transitioned into entrepreneurship. And in that video, he explains what he believes it truly takes to achieve financial success. Now, on this podcast, we're not talking about financial success. We're not talking about, this is not a wealth podcast. This is not a podcast about making money. This is a podcast about finishing our PhDs well and building impactful careers after that, and doing that as mamas, doing that while we're juggling loads of other things. And we don't always have the luxury of putting life on hold in order to achieve our goals. So we do have big goals. We have, very lofty goals as well. We are high achievers as well, but we are looking at a different type of success. However, for me, the principles and the concepts that Ali talked about in this video, I want to kind of break those down to see what does that mean when we are talking about achieving a different type of success or any type of success, right? And he draws heavily from lots of philosophies in this book, and he outlines the idea that wealth creation isn't about luck or isn't about taking shortcuts, but it's about developing rare skills that, people are able to take full ownership and accountability for the outcome of their effort. So, talking about leveraging technology or people or money or whatever to help you achieve your goals. And one of the core arguments that he makes in that video is that building significant wealth often requires an unhealthy obsession. So he describes how for most people who reach financial freedom, there is this period of intense, all-consuming focus. I mentioned this before. So this is where, their work, for example, dominated their lives, their personal sacrifices that they had to make, and that this idea of balancing or juggling was totally abandoned. There was a sense of imbalance created in order to achieve the goal. And he's very transparent about the downsides of this. He doesn't downplay the fact that these are actually sacrifices, the loneliness, the strained relationships, the stress that can come with this kind of single-minded pursuit of wealth. And he presents the idea that while this path can be grueling, it's often necessary if the goal is to reach the level of financial security, financial independence, financial freedom, where later on that freedom, balance, happiness, all the things that you're sacrificing on the journey to that thing, you can then prioritize those things later on. So in other words, he's saying hustle hard now is what works, and then you can live well later. And so he also emphasizes the idea that everything is hard. So staying broke is hard, working towards wealth is hard, and that at the end of the day, we've all got to choose the version of hard that we want to put up with and endure. And his message is honest, is authentic. He's being very realistic of, what it actually took for him to do that, where he was totally consumed with this idea of becoming wealthy. And I can imagine that the people watching this video are probably resonating with this, like this idea of subscribing to traditional hustle culture. It makes sense, right? It's what people are talking about, and the obsession with productivity and really, pushing limits and boundaries to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And so for me, it really prompted the question. I was watching this video and all I was thinking about is scholarly motherhood and how what he's saying, how does it apply to scholarly motherhood? How does this work when you do have lofty goals, you are a high achiever, and you want to achieve something that's, not the average thing to achieve. Not everybody's out here doing a PhD. So you want to achieve this lofty goal, but you don't have the luxury of putting your whole life on hold in order to do it. In fact, maybe you could do that if you wanted to. But I suspect that if you're listening to my podcast and you're a regular listener here, you are probably of that mindset that actually there are other things in my life that I value. I have things that matter to me outside of my PhD, and my PhD is not all of me. And so I make that assumption, maybe rightfully or wrongfully, but I make the assumption that scholarly mamas who are listening to this podcast probably feel that sense of conflict. And they feel that sense of conflict because these other things also matter to them. the other hats that we're wearing that mean something to us. We're not willing to put them on hold, throw them out the window, sacrifice them all for the sake of finishing our PhDs and achieving this kind of academic success. And so the question that it left me with when I listened to the video was, is this sense of unhealthy obsession, is an unhealthy obsession, to use his words, truly the only or the best way to create a fulfilling life? And does, pursuit of a particular goal, and obviously in his case, he's talking about wealth, but in our case, we're thinking about academic success, but does pursuit of that goal require sacrificing the things that matter to us in the short term? This idea of putting health on hold, putting relationships on hold, putting personal happiness on hold in the short term so that we can achieve this goal. And then once this goal is achieved, we then, can always revisit the idea of relationships and happiness and joy and hobbies and all that stuff. Or, and this is my perspective, as you probably would know, is there a different, healthier way to approach the pursuit of academic success? One where this idea of blending and juggling, I don't really like to use the word balance, but harmonizing all of these hats, that isn't delayed until after the goal is achieved, but is built into the process, built into the journey, right? And so in today's episode, like I said, I want to talk about some of these questions. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong to this. This is purely my opinion. This is a perspective that I'm sharing. So you may not agree with this, but this is my reflection of watching that video and thinking, well, where does this leave us as scholarly mamas? Where does this actually leave us? And so respectfully, I may challenge some of these assumptions made in the video, and I would like to offer a different perspective on what it means to actually create fulfillment on the journey of the goal. So a more holistic approach, I guess, to success. And so maybe you may find it helpful to go watch the video and gather your own thoughts and your own perspective on what is being said. But I just wanted to share the areas where I disagree with this. And then I'm going to share the areas where I do agree, because I think it's only fair to share both sides of this coin, because there's some areas that I do agree and there's some areas that I don't. And of course, like I said, I am speaking about this from the perspective of academic success. So finishing your PhD and, achieving the goal, the academic goal that you have for yourself. So I'm not directly relating to what's being said in the video in a sense of like financial success, but I'm speaking more from the perspective of scholarly success. And so where do I disagree with this? I disagree with this on a few different levels. So the first one is, I don't believe that we need to eat, breathe, and sleep our research or our PhD in order to finish well. I don't. You know that. I don't believe that, because I think that as a mama, as someone who values other parts of my life, it just wouldn't work. It just will not get me to, it may allow me to achieve one of my goals, which is to, perhaps finish that PhD or what have you. But it will facilitate that at the expense of the other things that matter. So again, I don't believe that we need to eat, breathe, and sleep this work. I think it's important to do our best and to do quality work and to do it to the best of our ability. But I think that this idea of grinding, hustling, like all consuming, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. One of the other things that I thought about when I watched this video was that there's an inherent assumption that we have time. That we can control time, that we can decide at what point we'll focus on this. And then once this is done, we'll then come back to that. And I think, in the short term, that works. There are times on this journey, especially during the PhD journey, where I was having this conversation with my husband last night, that there were times when I was doing my PhD where I had big deadlines, or I had things I needed to finish, I had something I need to present, or I have something I need to do by a certain time. And in that little short term, maybe, a couple of weeks, I'm having to prioritize that. I'm having to make that the focus because I am working towards a deadline. I am a deadline driven person. So I like to set deadlines. Not everybody's like that, and I get it. But for me, that's how it helps me to organize myself, because I know, okay, I've got to reach this deadline, and I can work backwards from that deadline to what I need to do to meet the deadline. But the assumption based on what was being said in the video was that we have time, that we will, grind for a couple of years, 5-10 years. And then once that's done, we can come back to life. And I can tell you, that we lost our friend, very dear friend, my husband and I, very tragically and sadly and suddenly to cancer that was, not known, not causing any issues. And then suddenly a diagnosis, 3 weeks later, he was gone. And he didn't have time. He did not have time. He couldn't say, I'm going to grind for a few years and then I'll come back, because there was no coming back. He's no longer here. He had 2 young children. He's no longer here to see them grow up. So this assumption that we have time, I think, is fundamentally flawed, because we don't know how much time we have. None of us know how much time we have. And so for me, that's why I chose to prioritize quality over quantity, because again, I don't know how much time I have, but I do know I have the present. I have right now, and I have a choice right now how I will invest the resources, the energy, the time, the money right now. I have those choices right now. That is for certain. The past is gone. I can't change that. The future is unknown. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I know that I have the present. And I'm not saying not to set goals, by the way, because I am a big fan of setting goals, I'm also reading another book at the moment called Tiny Experiments, and talks about setting pacts and the fact that, we can decide that we are going to commit to something for a set amount of time. And that's like setting a pact for yourself. And I think it's a really good way of, committing to something and actually seeing that through to completion. I was also listening to another podcast recently where it talks about goal setting. I'll talk about that in another episode, but it really talks about how we can break that down. And again, it's this idea of quantity over quality that is projected in this idea that we have all this time, because it's like, well, we achieve these metrics, we achieve these measures of success. Once we achieve those, then we can come back, or we are going to put X amount of time, X amount of energy, X amount of hours in the week into that thing, and then we'll get the return later on and take that time back. But again, time is not for us to control. We don't have control over that. And so this idea of, focusing on measurable outputs and metrics of success, again, I think is a flaw of thinking we've got so much time because we're going to focus on putting these outputs out, achieving these things, and then we'll relax and enjoy life later. How many people do we know who have worked their whole lives, grind, and then they reach retirement and they don't even live long enough to enjoy their retirement? I think that is so tragically sad. And I'm not saying that we can control the fact that we can say, like, we're going to decide that we're going to live for this length of time in our retirement, because we don't know how much time we have. But what I'm saying is what you have is now. You have now, right? Invest in that. Invest in how you choose to spend your time now, building those memories, creating those moments, because again, we don't know what's coming in the future. So this idea of quantity of time spent, for me, is fundamentally flawed, because I prefer to focus on the quality of the time I have, the quality of the present moments that I have, as opposed to grinding now, spending all those hours and all that time now grinding, and then this hope that we'll have time in the future to enjoy the fruits of our labor. The other reason I disagree is, or the other way in which I disagree, is the assumption that we are in a position to put our lives on hold in pursuit of goals. So this idea that either we don't have any responsibilities outside of the goals that we're pursuing, and so we could just pour everything into these goals, into pursuit, and that if we do have responsibilities, we can delegate those responsibilities, outsource those responsibilities so that we can buy ourselves the time to invest in our pursuit. So this idea that if we do have responsibilities, i.e. we've got kids, we've got older parents that we're looking after or what have you, that we could just, focus on us, focus on what we want to achieve and put those things on hold, outsource those, delegate those so that we can focus on investing in the goal that we're in pursuit of. And then once we've achieved that, we can always come back to looking after the family or, what have you. And so this assumption that either we don't have lots of other responsibilities, in which case we've got more than enough time to invest in the goals, or if we do have other responsibilities, that we are in a position to outsource those responsibilities. And again, that is not always true. That is not always true. Yes, there's some people who are doing PhDs and they don't have the responsibility of kids and family life. And I get it. You can invest more time. I experienced that. I was surrounded by people who were in that position and they were able to work late, finish faster, all the rest of it. And I guess this is a nice time to mention the fact that I am not saying that my approach, this kind of more blended approach, isn't without sacrifice too. It is with sacrifice, because for me, one of the ways that I see the sacrifice was that it took me twice as long to finish, right? So I achieved my goal a lot later than perhaps those people who didn't have the responsibilities or could, for whatever reason, personal choices, they were able to invest more time in pursuit of that goal. I couldn't do that. I couldn't afford to have this unhealthy obsession with the pursuit of my PhD, because I would have had to do that at the expense of my family life. As you know, we are here in the UK. We don't have our family here. And so our kids have us. They have us. We are their family. My husband and I, we are their family in this country. And so for us to put that to one side while I was in pursuit of my PhD would have been at the detriment and sacrifice of my kids. And I just was not prepared to do that. And so again, this assumption that we can put other aspects of our lives on hold, I think is fundamentally flawed. So this focus on the measurable, I think, is problematic because again, all things that matter in life are not quantifiable. And this is where I say it's important for you to define success for yourself. What does success mean to you, right? If your definition of success are purely measurable, quantifiable metrics or outputs, then by all means, have the unhealthy obsession and go about your goals. But a lot of times, and this has definitely been the case for me, the things that matter to me, they were not quantifiable. They were not measurable. They were not things that I could, count and say, I'm successful because I've achieved this. I've got that. I've got that. I've got that. Some of those things that I talk about that really matter, they evade empirical measurement. They can't be measured. They can't be quantified. And so I think that's fundamentally one of the challenges and why it's so hard for people to want to pursue things that feel like they can't be measured, that feel like they are not quantifiable, because they can't, you can't show that, you can't demonstrate that, you can't project that, right, for other people to see. But not everything that matters can be quantified. It's just my belief. You may agree or disagree, but again, I'm just sharing my perspective. And so one of the things that I wanted to share as well is where I agree with this video, where I agree with this idea. Because he's not saying that this is what you need to do to be rich. He's not taking a moral kind of standpoint on this of like, you need to do all these things. He's saying if your goal is that, if your goal is X, then you need to be willing to do Y in order to achieve X. That's what he's essentially saying. So then it made me think, well, what it really comes down to then is what actually is the goal? Because his argument is the misery resides in the gap between the goal and the actions. So if you have this goal and you are not willing to do the action required to achieve that goal, that's where the conflict is. And that's where the misalignment is. And that misalignment is what creates the misery. So if that's what it takes to achieve the goal, are you willing to do the action to achieve the goal? So fundamentally for me, that says, well, the starting point here is what is actually the goal? Really defining, what are you really trying to achieve here? What is the end point? I was having a discussion with a professor this week and we were talking about, the so what? Like, what is the so what of all of this? Why does it matter? What are you trying to actually achieve? And if you don't know what you're actually trying to achieve, then maybe start there. But is there a misalignment between the goal, what you're actually trying to achieve, and your actions? What are you actually doing? And if there is misalignment, why is there misalignment? Where is the gap? What is actually the gap? Identify what that is. Because maybe you're pursuing a goal that you don't actually want to pursue. Or maybe that's not your goal anyway. And so that's why it feels so difficult. And that's why there's this frustration and misery. And I think fundamentally, as he was saying, you get to a point where you kind of, I think a lot of this comes with life maturity as well and life experiences. And I think, you get to a point where you start to really reflect on what matters. And I think he's saying that, yes, you reach that goal, you reach that financial pinnacle, and then you can start to explore hobbies, and then you can start to think about life and marriage and kids and all the wonderful things that life has to offer, relationships and all of that. But I think fundamentally, what he's saying is you get to a certain point in life, right, where you begin to think about meaning of life, where you begin to think about legacy, begin to think about deeper things than just those external metrics. I think that's kind of what it might be. Now that you've achieved this goal, now you've given yourself the mental space to actually realize and reflect on what is it that matters to me in life. And where I disagree is that I don't think you need to wait to achieve the goal in order to do that. I don't think you need to wait until you finish your PhD in order to think about what matters in your life, or where do you want to, invest your time and energy. What really matters at the end of all of this. I don't think you need to wait to the end of your, PhD or, you finish and achieve the goal in order to do that. And for those of you who've been here from the beginning, who have been listening to me talk on this podcast from, even when I was on my PhD journey, you know that this is fundamentally my perspective, that you don't have to wait until you've finished your PhD to enjoy your life, to focus and prioritize what matters to you, to have a hobby, to have some fresh air, to come up for air and actually just breathe a little bit. Like, you don't have to wait until you've finished in order to do that, right? Even if you're juggling multiple hats, even if you're juggling lots of things, it's really important to get clarity on what matters to you and be okay with the fact that some of the things that matter to you may not be measurable, may not, be visible outputs that you can say, look, I've achieved this, I've achieved that, but that doesn't matter. It's okay because it's what matters to you. So he talks about the fact that you can't have a balanced life. If you do, then you probably won't achieve the goal. And again, I don't agree with that because I think that you can actually have success in the area of your life that you want to, but you just have to be prepared for that to look different, to take a different path, and to be prepared to make a different kind of sacrifice. And for me, that sacrifice was the fact that it's going to take me longer. It's going to take me longer. I'm going to go at a slower pace, but that's okay, because what that's allowing me to do is to actually prioritize what matters to me. And so is an unhealthy obsession with achieving a goal required to achieve academic success? Is it? That's the £1 million question. No pun intended here, but that is the £1 million question. Is it an all or nothing? Is it a all-encompassing focus on that goal in order to achieve it at the expense of the things that matter to you, like your family life, like your relationships, like your health, like your mental health? Like, is an unhealthy obsession really required in order to achieve success? I submit to you that what is required is clarity on what success actually means to you. What does that actually look like for you? What is the goal that you are actually pursuing here? How will you know when you've achieved it? And can you build harmony into the journey of pursuit? Is that a possible proposition? And so I am not here to judge. I am just saying that these are my reflections on that video. These are my reflections on this thinking of, is hustle culture, grind culture, this unhealthy obsession with achieving a goal, the unhealthy obsession with pursuit of a goal, is that really required in order to achieve success? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Drop me a DM on Instagram. I am at Mrs. Mummy PhD. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. What does it really take to achieve success? What does it really require an unhealthy obsession? Does it? Maybe I'm wrong on this. I am open to being wrong. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are, because I think that this is one of the fundamental challenges that we experience as scholarly mamas. We're living in a culture where this is what success seems to require, even in an academic context. And as mamas, perhaps we don't want to have that unhealthy obsession. I don't want to have an unhealthy obsession with anything, much less something like, a PhD that at the end of the day, when I compare that or, my relationships with my kids, my family, it doesn't even compare. But does it require an unhealthy obsession? I don't know. Lots of food for thought. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But until next time, as always, Mama, I'm sending you lots of love and gratitude. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and if you did and you want in on this movement, please head over to mrsmummyphd.com or scholarlymamas.com. If you want to do your PhD well without sacrificing yourself or those you love dearest, then you need your hands on all the ways that we can work together to transform your journey of scholarly motherhood from one of overwhelm, disillusionment and burnout to one of scholarly joy and purposeful success. Make sure you head over to mrsmummyphd.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. I cannot wait to work with you. Remember, Mama, these are our journeys of becoming.